Okay, today we're going to talk about a little bit of judicial conduct in Texas, um, methods of judicial selection in Texas, and then a little bit about the criminal justice system as a whole. So with all these different judges that are elected, or if it's municipal appointed, there are expectations of proper behavior and proper exercise of their judicial conduct. As you remember from earlier lecture, there's very little in the way for some of these judges, and as far as qualifications and requirements for the position. So recognizing that the Texas legislature has mandated what they refer to as continuing education for judges. Most of this is recognizing, of course, that people that are running for election as judges probably are attorneys, probably have had training, and this is truly continuing education for them. And so the state has tried to address some of that by ensuring that education happens for judges after the fact, after they're elected. There are also written expectations as to how justice is supposed to be fair and impartial in Texas. The Texas Supreme Court has written and published the Code of Judicial Conduct for judges, which is supposed to give them some kind of guidance as to how to act as an impartial judge in these kinds of situations. So it essentially is saying, here are the professional standards. Here's what we think judges, magistrates, right, ought to be doing and how they ought to be doing it. And so once you're elected to office, and which is the case for most of these positions, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're up on what judicial conduct is supposed to be, what the proceedings of courts are supposed to be. And so you're expected to act professionally. If you don't, there's really not much in the way of Texas oversight that would force you to be a better judge. There is a commission out there called the Commission on Judicial Conduct that's established by the Constitution, given its perspective and marching orders by the legislature. Its job is to act as a clearinghouse for complaints that are made against judges and their conduct in court, how they handle things. If it goes outside the bounds of issues that would lead to an appeal, there's certainly the commission here to review complaints made about individual judges. However, that commission, while it does have the ability to review these complaints, and it can issue findings or results or reports on those complaints and what they find, it really doesn't have much in the way to do with actually disciplining judges that are going outside the bounds of appropriate conduct. They can write a report and say this action, this judicial behavior is inconsistent with the Code of Judicial Conduct, that it's something that is viewed as inappropriate and should not be engaged in, and may go so far as to publicly wag a finger at a judge and to tell them that that you're not doing this the right way, and to publicly shame them, in a sense, censure them. In extreme cases, they can recommend to a tribunal to be drawn up, and that judge to then be reviewed and possibly removed from office, although most judges, for something that serious, would probably step down. But the fact is that's not something that's done very often. It's not a case where we see the commission stepping out and being very proactive in this area. But they can write that report, write that review, and send it up to ask the tribunal to look at their recommendations and either accept them or reject them. Other than that, there's not much going on. It's going to really pull a judge back into line. Now, ideally, most of the individuals that are wanting to be judges are wanting to be fair and impartial, or wanting to do a good job. They've been elected to that position in Texas mostly, for the most part, to do that. And there is an ideal that people are watching them, and the elections can be used as a recall in a sense. Judges are living up to their expected conduct. If a judge does something that's felonious in nature, then the commission does have the ability to suspend them, but that means that they've been indicted for a felony offense, which is a fairly concrete result that there's a lot of evidence this judge needs to stand trial for what they've done. Usually those felonious offenses that would get this indictment have nothing to do with the judge or the judge's behavior as a judge, but as dealing more with the individual who's gotten themselves into trouble with the law, and their job happens to be being a judge. So if that's the case, they can be suspended while after they've been indicted or formally charged with the felony. Same thing can happen if there's an official charge of misconduct, although that's generally not the case. I think if I remember correctly, there was a district judge in Houston that was charged with official misconduct, and they eventually, as things drug out, stepped down in the sense that they didn't run for re-election, because as an election is coming up every 4 to 6 years. Quite often, by the time charges like this can be made and actions and reviews can be put out there and recommendations, you're probably coming up on an election anyway. And then reading the tea leaves of an election, a judge that's in this situation would probably step down as opposed to run for re-election. Which brings us to consideration about how judges are selected. Now, across the country, there are at least 4 different ways that judges are selected to be judges. Texas, as we already know, elects most of their judges, unless they're municipal judges, whereupon the municipal ordinances will dictate how they get selected. So the 4 methods that we see when we look around the United States for selecting judges are an election, which is the Texas way of doing these things, which can be partisan or nonpartisan, meaning they're affiliated with the political party or not. We also have what are called legislative elections, where state legislatures actually elect the judges. So the representatives of legislatures cast their votes to select judges. You see that in just a few states, South Carolina and Virginia being prominent ones, not very prevalent. A third and very common way of getting judges into their positions is through an appointment process. Appointment processes usually are set up by states so that the executive branch appoints these individuals to be judges. Sometimes there will be a board of review that will look at individuals who want to be eligible to be selected, and will do a legal background check, in a sense, in that they're looking at do they have a law degree, have they practiced, if they have, what kind of judge have they been in the past? Have they been on legislatures? How have they served in politics? And those things will go into sorting those folks into approved to be selected or not approved to be selected. However, that's usually just a recommendation, and the states that have an appointment process can choose to follow that or not. So most of the time when you see an appointment process, you see a governor probably consulting a list of approved individuals and selecting from that list. And then at some point, quite often, you're going to have a legislature come in behind that appointment and approve it, right? Give consent to it, say, yeah, this person, whether we agree politically with them or not, does have all the requisites for being a judge and was properly appointed, and therefore they're blessed and the consent is given to their appointment. And then the fourth way is what we call the Missouri plan, which is a combination of both an appointment and election process. The way that works is usually there's, again, a pool of people that have been approved for judicial selection. Executive branch almost always is the one that does the appointment process. And then after a designated period of time, 2 years, 4 years, something like that, a judge is brought up for what is called a retention election. And that allows the public, having seen a judge do their job for a certain amount of time, vote to keep them or not, to confirm them to that position or not. And what happens usually is at that point, they're doing a good job, they get confirmation, their appointment is transitioned over to a lifetime appointment, which is what usually happens in the regular appointment process as well. So you've got these four ways of doing it. Texas is an election process. And so based upon the position that you're running for, you're going to serve 2, 4, 6 years and come up for re-election. And so for almost all those judges, the voters decide who's going to be in that position or not. What this does is it keeps judges ideally accountable to the voting population. In other words, a judge that's not doing a good job or is perceived as not being fair and impartial, right? If the people are paying attention, can vote them out of their job. Realistically, that's probably not really what's happening, because most of us as voters barely pay attention to people that are running for governor or for the legislature, and hardly ever know much about the folks that are running for a judicial position, much less know about their qualifications and experience for that position. And if they're running for re-election, the odds that we've paid attention to how well they're doing on a day-by-day basis as a judge is probably not the case either, right? We're just not doing it as voters. So in a real sense, it's voters voting for people. They don't know who they are, they don't know what their qualifications are, and they don't know what their experience has been in the position if they're running for re-election. So you've got the blind voting for not only one people they don't see and don't know, but have no idea about who they are, right? So while there is judicial accountability in the sense that folks can be voted out, there's not the requisite understanding and knowledge to effectively execute that accountability by the voter. So there's probably more accountability through the appointment process in a sense, because there at least you have a pragmatic perspective from a legislative or executive position that's wanting to put people in office that are going to do well and reflect well on those who appointed them. However, again, most of these appointment processes, once a judge is appointed, they're appointed for life to these positions, which has its good elements and its bad elements. And the good elements of a lifetime appointment is that once a judge is there, they don't have to worry about, are they doing what the public wants? They're not going to come up for re-election and have to face that. Did they make the public happy? Which means they don't have to pay attention necessarily to the politics surrounding their judgments. They can, if they choose, pay attention only to what's fair, impartial, and legal. In that sense, it grants them judicial independence after the appointment. But that is only incumbent upon the appointee to choose that as how they want to operate. So they might, and I would say that most of them probably do approach the position with that kind of focus and ideal. However, what gets them there, what gets them appointed in the first place, is that they're probably well acquainted and very much holding the same political positions and ideals as the person or body that's responsible for appointing them. So in this sense, the appointment process is subject to what we call cronyism. In other words, if I'm the governor of the state of Texas and I'm appointing a judge, let's say there's a position that's come open and it's close to election time, I'm going to appoint somebody in this case to fill the position for 6-8 months or something until an election happens. I'm going to probably select someone for that position that believes the same way I do politically and on legal issues. And then when it's time for their office to be up for re-election, most of us voters aren't going to know much about them or who they are or what they've done. And we tend to just vote to keep the people there. So the appointment process doesn't guarantee independence. And at the front end of it, it almost guarantees a lack of independence. So that's why the Missouri plan is set up to include both of these, right? You do the Judicial Selection Committee on the front end. They identify qualified people. The appointment process follows through and appoints someone from that qualified list, and then subjects that person to at least one retention election to see that, hey, they're doing their job the way they're supposed to. So any of these four ways could be used and are used in the different states. Texas uses the election process for ours, and we've had that since the 1800s, rights encapsulated in the 1876 Constitution, and was one of the big changes that was trying to bring the judgeship closer to the people and ensure that judges were making decisions that were following with the expectations of the populace at the time. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the criminal justice system in Texas as a whole from a very high level perspective. We've been focused in this chapter on looking just at the court system. Earlier, we talked about some of the agencies and stuff. We've talked about some of the law enforcement. So there are three components that make up the criminal justice system. The law enforcement and criminal prosecution section, where you're talking about police and county sheriffs and prosecuting attorneys, district attorneys, right? All of the folks that are working through the bureaucracies to apply the law and to run the court systems the way administratively they're supposed to be. We've talked now about the court systems, which are your trial systems, right? And in the criminal justice system here, of course, we're focused on the criminal trial system and the criminal appellate system. And so here you're looking at prosecutors and public defenders, you're looking at the jury system in Texas, and you're looking at those courts that have criminal jurisdiction over cases in Texas. The third part of this criminal justice system, which we haven't discussed at all, is the corrections system, which is the system that's in place in Texas to deal with those individuals that have been convicted, arrested and convicted and sentenced to incarceration, or sentenced to some type of penalty system they're going to have to pay back to the system through fines or paroles or house arrest, or go to prison, or maybe even be punished through capital punishment. So those are the three big chunks that we have, and we've talked a good bit about some of them. Now, the law enforcement system, I'll give you a little bit more on that here, right? Our law enforcement system in Texas is incredibly decentralized. It's all over the place. We have 254 counties in Texas. Constitutionally, each of those counties has a law enforcement system that is designated the county sheriff, right? And that sheriff and the department of that sheriff is responsible for law enforcement within that county. Those sheriffs are elected to those positions. And so we have 254 of those county sheriff's offices. We also have, right, all of the municipal police departments that are brought about when the state allows an unincorporated area to become a municipality. And one of the services they want to provide is public safety. And so they'll institute a municipal police department. You'll have a chief of police working under the city council in some form or fashion and applying both state law and municipal ordinances within their municipalities. At the state level, we also have state police, right? The Department of Public Safety. And the Department of Public Safety is a wide-ranging office and bureaucracy, but they're responsible for applying state law across the state. A lot of what they do, if you were just look at it as a percentage of work, a lot of what they're going to do is be dedicated toward state highway patrol. But they also do criminal investigations. They also do emergency preparedness and response. So there's a lot going on there that's organized at the state level. We've talked about the court system. We've looked at the different levels of courts in Texas. Now they're decentralized. Now there's this overlap. And, while there is certainly a hierarchy there, there's a lot of opportunity for things to be handled differently from court to court and from judge to judge. So while it's not a unified court system, it does have some strengths and weaknesses that we talked about before. So the rest of this time, we're going to focus on the correction system and how it is that we deal with individuals who've gone through, right, the court system and been incarcerated for the most case, right? They've been convicted of a crime and are being sent into some sort of holding facility, some sort of reduction of their freedom and their ability to act on their own, and are being punished by the state. So this can happen in a couple of different places. Municipal areas have holding cells and jails. Counties, right, have county jails. And then the state itself has state jails and penitentiaries. And then we also have for-profit prison systems in Texas that contract usually with counties or the state and provide the incarceration that is necessary. And it's a contractual situation that develops between elements of the state government or the county government and these private entities that build these private prisons. you're going to be eligible for incarceration for either the conviction of a misdemeanor or a felony. So we do need to have a little bit of an understanding there of what we're talking about. Most of the time, misdemeanors are relatively minor crimes. They're almost nonviolent, almost universally nonviolent in nature, although some of them have some simple assault situations there. Most of the time, we're talking about crimes against committed against property. We're talking about crimes against safety for the society as a whole, like drug possession, theft, trespassing, burglary, something like that on a low level that might get you jail time, might get you some house arrest, will get you probation, something like that. It's usually going to be a misdemeanor that we're talking about in that area. Felonies, however, are much more serious. And this is a case where the peace of society is deemed to have been violated in a major way. It's a serious threat to society. And what we're talking about here are invasions of private property, especially households and businesses, where there's going to be theft of substantial value, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 kind of stuff are going to be on the table there. Assault of other, injuries, assaults and injuries of other people. If we're looking at drug issues, we're looking at something beyond mere possession. Most often we're looking at some form of distribution or not sure the right term, but where you're manufacturing controlled substances. So we're looking at things that are fairly substantial in the way that they're going to impact society as a whole. Remember, when we looked at courts, these felonies that have jail time with them are situated at the state district court level. So you're looking at a fairly high level of court taking very serious cases of breaching the peace. And so felonies are the ones that are going to get you in serious trouble over time. Once you are convicted of a penalty that's going to carry jail time in Texas, you're going to be in some form or fashion transferred over to the correctional system. And so really the focus I'd like for people to have on this is not so much, what does the jail look like or the penal system look like or the prison system, right, in a concrete thing, but a little more theoretical perspective of why we have prisons and correctional systems. What's their purpose? Why do we have them in place? What do we expect them to do? What's the end point of this? So we're looking at, when we look at the correctional system, we need to be asking questions about how we expect them to work, right? Do we expect them to simply punish people? Do we expect them, in a sense, to provide some way to remove people from society for a time, right? Do we want them to be places that are dire enough that people will look at them and go, I don't want to be there, right? Or do we want to maybe use them for an opportunity to correct bad behavior? So these are four of the goals that can be easily identified for any correctional system. It's a system of retribution. In other words, you did something bad, you need to be punished, you need to make amends. We're going to use the correctional system to exact retribution from you. And we do a lot of that, right? I mean, especially when we're talking about taking away someone's freedom, levying some kind of fine on them, right? We're looking at retribution. Texas, to a small extent, does put a little bit of effort into rehabilitation. We do provide some mental health. We do provide some basic educational opportunities to help rehabilitate people, with the idea being that maybe some of the basic building blocks that we expect the state to provide for people they missed or didn't use, and we're going to try again to educate them and give them some tools that will let them come back into society rehabilitated. Texas is not generally very strong in the rehabilitation area. We like the retribution area a lot. Given our political ideologies in Texas, it makes sense. Another place that we see this correctional system goal work its way out is with public safety. While you might hope that putting someone in jail will punish them or might lead them to consider a different path in life, one thing for sure you know is that if you incarcerate someone, they're being prevented from hurting other people in public at that time. They might hurt, excuse me, might can hurt some other people that are in prison. But once you commit someone to a prison, while they're there, you're enhancing public safety back in society because those people can't reoffend the public. And so in that sense, if that's what you expect out of a correctional system, it delivers that. The deterrence angle is an interesting concern or consideration, because what you're hoping here for something to be an effective deterrent is that you have a system in place that is effective, that works. And so people will look at that and go, wow, if I do this bad thing and get caught, that's going to happen to me. And I don't want that. So I won't do whatever the deed is that would get me possibly placed in jail. So in that sense, it scares people into not breaking the law, and so that they don't offend the public safety. You have to kind of look at that on your own and look at the crime rate and try to figure out if you think it actually does act as a deterrence effect. This is one of the very popular arguments brought up around the issue of applying the death penalty to someone, is that knowing that there is the potential to be put to death for what you do, if it's heinous enough, the argument is that it will scare people away from doing that. Yet we still see people on death row. So obviously it's not a foolproof method of deterrence. When we talk to people on death row and we ask them, did you know that by doing this, you might be subject to the death penalty? The answer for them is usually twofold. It's either, yes, I knew, but I didn't think I'd get caught, in which case deterrence is not working. Or it's that wasn't a consideration at the time because I was so caught up in whatever the moment was. Right? I was so mad, I was out of my mind, I was on drugs, whatever the case was, that I wasn't in my right mind. And so the deterrence effect didn't work because I wasn't in my right mind. And so if that's the case, right, I mean, it's the opportunities for deterrence to work in those really exceptional cases are probably pretty slim. So what I would like is for you to think about these 4 goals of the correctional system. And then in a sense, think about them from our political ideology perspective, because quite often you can look at how someone perceives what the goal or role of government is in general, and see that one of these correctional system goals, or more than one, might ideally fit with their political perspective to begin with. So for example, right, we've got our 4 ideologies listed here. And if you remember, right, populist is that perspective where If you're looking at policy, populists are looking at it from the government is a great tool to use to both ensure public safety and ensure individual equality. So we like to use government as a tool to address our problems quite often. Well, if you're a populist in your political perspective, right, you can see a lot of these four goals possibly coming into play, right? Populists believe government has a responsibility for enforcing morality and ideas and beliefs of a proper society and how people should act in it, as well as what are proper roles for individuals within society. So retribution and rehabilitation and public safety, all of these deterrents, all four of these can be argued to be a reason that a populist would be arguing what the correctional system's goals are, right? A populist would think that people do need to be punished, but that we can also maybe through punishment rehabilitate them. The old, we're not going to spare the rod, so we don't spare the, we don't spoil the child. It's that kind of perspective, right? You punish people hoping that the punishment will drive home the lesson, maybe rehabilitate them through the punishment, or rehabilitate them with, here's what society is supposed to give you as a citizen, and somehow you didn't get it, so we're going to try again. As well as while you're being incarcerated, right, a populist would be very much on board with, hey, you're not hurting anybody else right now, so that's a good thing. And then people outside the system, right, that haven't been convicted of anything, will see that working system and go, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to have be punished. I don't want to have my behavior corrected. I don't want to be incarcerated, so I won't do the act, right? So you can see a populist arguing for all of these. Libertarian, to go to the opposite political ideology, really is mostly focused on the public safety idea here, right? I mean, a libertarian's looking at this going, right, we want people to have as much freedom as possible. We don't want to bring the power of government down on anybody if we don't have to. But when we do, we're going to do it to make sure that those of us who are acting proper have still the ability to continue acting proper. We're going to remove the threat by putting them in jail. And that's going to provide the safety and society we need. It's also going to possibly lend itself a little bit to deterrence. But you're not going to see libertarians wanting to spend the money, the time, or the effort to rehab. As an individual, you might hear some retribution arguments from them, but as a goal for society, libertarians are probably going to focus mostly on public safety, right? And you take the bad actors out of the situation. So those are your two extremes on the ones that want to use a lot of government, and the ones that don't want to use government hardly at all. Our liberals and our conservatives are going to break down like we saw them earlier in the semester along. Conservatives wanting to provide public safety, right? Wanting to provide public order in the sense that that's where they're willing to use government. So you're probably going to see them focused on public safety and retribution, hoping to get a little deterrence out of it, not too concerned with rehabilitation. Whereas liberals will, right, always be trying to get equity and fairness and justice involved in this. So they're going to want to bring the individual back into society and hopefully have rehabilitated them and had them pay back what they needed to pay back, but also invested back into them so that they can hopefully become a productive member of society. So you're going to see them looking at those equality issues and those justice issues that will bring them around to the rehabilitation. They won't deny the public safety or the retribution part of it, but they will be willing to spend more time and effort in trying to rehab the individual. So I hope that gives you some kind of perspective into how the goals of a correctional system might be championed by different political ideologies, with a little different focus coming from what the proper role of government is. And it will bleed over into what the proper goals or the most expected goals of the correction system. All right, I think we're done.